In Clash Royale's history, some decks arrive and leave quietly. Others change how the game is played. Every so often, a deck appears that doesn't just win matches, it rewrites expectations. You queue for a normal game, and by the time you're halfway through the first minute, you're already wondering if this match was fair. You feel frustrated, helpless, maybe even a bit angry, like the rules you knew no longer apply. Those are the decks I want to talk about today. Not the ones that were slightly stronger for a week, but the ones that shaped metas, forced balance overhauls, and left a mark on how people built decks for years. They didn't just win games. They removed counterplay, punished small mistakes harshly, and in some cases, survived balance updates that should have killed them. I'm going to walk through 3 of those decks. I'll explain how they worked, why they felt unfair, how players tried to beat them, and finally, what they left behind. This isn't nostalgia for the sake of it. It's a look at how game balance, player skill, and design choices collide. Let's start with a deck that turned many matches into endurance tests. X-Bow and Tesla. When Clash Royale was still young, the X-Bow-Tesla archetype rose and dominated because it played a different game. Where most decks focused on big pushes or fast cycles, X-Bow-Tesla turned matches into slow, surgical chess. You weren't playing to overwhelm the opponent. You were playing to find a tiny opening and exploit it forever. The core idea was deceptively simple. Place the X-Bow, protect it with a Tesla, and use cheap cycle cards to reset and protect. Ice Spirit and Skeletons kept threats busy. Archers or Musketeers supported from the back. Spells like Fireball or Log cleaned up counters. The Tesla hid inside the range and denied large melee attackers. If you did this right, the X-Bow would lock onto a tower and chip away while your defenses held. What made this feel illegal was less the raw damage and more the experience of playing against it. You would commit to a push, sacrifice Elixir to take down a defender, and then watch the X-Bow pick at your tower while the Tesla waited behind. Untouched. There was no single decisive moment where you could respond and turn the tide. Instead, it was a constant wearing down, small losses accumulating until one tower fell and the match tilted irreversibly. Between 2016 and 2018, the deck appeared across ladder and tournament play. Top players refined cycles, learned exact elixir windows, and punished any overcommit. The X-Bow players who mastered timing were clinical. They didn't make flashy plays. They erased opponent mistakes with quiet, methodical pressure. People hated it because it removed obvious counterplay. Traditional beatdown decks couldn't easily break the defensive setup. Spawner and bait decks had trouble too, because Tesla plus X-Bow answered a lot of those responses. Even when a player sneaked a counterpush, the X-Bow's incremental damage rarely let them recover. Designers reacted with a series of nerfs and reworks. Adjustments to X-Bow targeting, Tesla stats, spawn timings for small units, but the archetype adapted. It splintered into variations. X-Bow cycle, X-Bow mortar hybrids, even siege control decks that used similar principles. The point wasn't that the single cards were forever broken. The point was that a style of play had emerged which prioritized absolute control over interactive back-and-forth trading. Facing X-Bow Tesla was frustrating because the opponent's plan was invisible until it was too late. You described the match as long and miserable. 6 minutes of waiting, probing, and small losses. The deck taught the community a lesson about patience being equivalent to power, and it left a mark on balance philosophy. When control is too safe and too effective, the game stops feeling like interactive combat. Lumberloon. A few years later, the meta shifted. Mechanics changed, cards evolved, but synergy remained a force multiplier. Lumberloon is a perfect example. 2 cards that together felt greater than the sum of their parts. Lumberjack drops, clears a path, dies, and leaves a rage. Balloon follows, boosted, moving faster and harder to intercept. The balloon's death damage and bomb-like payload made even near misses count. Impair that combo with supports. Baby Dragon, Mega Minion, Tornado, or even Freeze. and you had a push that punished the tiniest timing error. What made Lumberloon so frustrating was how little room it left for reaction. If you had a tornado ready and timed it perfectly, you survived. If you didn't, even perfect micro could be too late. The decision space for the defender became binary. You either had the exact card in hand or you didn't. The push didn't rely on overwhelming elixir. It relied on forcing one precise, correct response. Lumberloon's dominance between 2019 and 2021 wasn't just because the combo was strong. It was because the rest of the game tended to funnel opportunities in its favor. The meta favored fast play and bridge pressure, which let Lumberjack create openings. A well-timed rage could let a balloon slip through while your counters were out of position. Running it with Freeze amplified the problem. Freeze pauses everything on the board, and a frozen air troop with rage on top becomes incredibly difficult to stop. Players tried every workaround. Tornado plays, proactive tornado to pull the balloon to the king tower, specific anti-air setups, even baiting Freeze. Some Some players built decks to outvalue the combo over time rather than trying to stop it outright. Tournament play saw inventive counters and careful timing, but at ladder level, the deck still punished micro mistakes heavily. Why did this feel illegal? Because it compressed complexity into a single decisive sequence. One misclick or one bad timing could cost half a tower. That intensity made matches feel volatile and, for many players, unfair. When you queued into Lumberloon, you couldn't enjoy a measured fight. You braced for a possible lightning strike. Designers pushed nerfs and balance changes to Balloon and other supporting cards. Each patch reduced some combinations, but players adapted, changing supports, tweaking spell choices, and sometimes just switching to a deck that forced the opponent out of a Lumberloon comfort zone. The combo's repeated returns showed that simple, well-timed synergies are resilient. When a small window of opportunity is wide enough and consistent enough, it becomes the core of a meta. Lumberloon's legacy is complicated. It popularized the idea that a pair of cards, timed and placed correctly, could wreck games. It pushed defensive play toward proactive counters and highlighted the limits of reactive defense in ladder play. Hog Cycle. If Expo represented control and Lumberloon represented explosive synergy, 2.6 Hog Cycle represents longevity. It's not flashy, it's not a high-variance combo. It's a statement that fundamentals, when executed perfectly, remain powerful across metas. The archetype's core cards are basic. Hog Rider for pressure, Ice Golem, or Ice Spirit to tank and kite, Musketeer for defense and support, Cannon for building defense, Skeletons for cycle, and cheap spells for chip and reset. The average cost sits around 2.6 elixir, hence the name, and that low cost is the deck's core weapon. What the deck does is simple: apply constant low-risk pressure while maintaining a resilient defense. A good 2.6 player cycles to the Hog repeatedly, forcing the opponent to respond and often overcommit. Every small mistake in defense opens a chip window. Every wrong placement or bad spell use becomes a liability. Over time, those tiny chips add up. The reason it feels illegal in a different sense is its consistency. Where a single explosive combo can feel unfair because it ends games quickly, 2.6 feels unfair because it never leaves. Even after big balance shifts and new cards, the deck often resurfaces. People declare it dead, players refine timing, it wins again. Its persistence makes it a meta anchor. High-level players who mastered 2.6 bring a brutal level of discipline. They don't just cycle evenly, they track opponents' cards, bait spells, and convert minimal advantages into tower damage. A single well-timed fireball prediction or log can flip the momentum, and 2.6 players make those moments count. Against inexperienced opponents, the deck often feels unstoppable because small mistakes are abundant. 2.6's influence stretches beyond its win rate. It set a standard for what good play looks like: efficient elixir trades, calm pressure, and the ability to punish overcommitment. It forced players to value cycle speed and elixir management in a way many newer cards and champions still can't overcome. One reason 2.6 remains relevant is that it exposes imperfections in other decks. When a meta shifts toward heavy tanks or slow builds, 2.6 punishes the lack of tempo. When a meta favors large swarms or spell bait, the right spell timing turns the matchup in favor of the cycle deck. Its matchups change, but its principle doesn't. Persistent pressure and precise micro-win games. This isn't a story of a deck that was obviously broken by numbers. It's the story of a deck that refuses to die because of its intrinsic efficiency. Its longevity suggests that power doesn't always wear the same clothes. Sometimes the strongest strategy is the simplest one executed better than everyone else. Looking back at these decks, it's honestly crazy how much they've shaped Clash Royale into what it is today. If you've been around since the early years, you probably know what I mean. These decks weren't just popular, they defined entire eras. Every one of them, from Expo Tesla to Lumberloon to 2.6 Hog Cycle, carried its own story, its own playstyle, and its own legacy that still echoes in the game even now. The Expo Tesla deck wasn't flashy. It wasn't the kind of deck you picked up for quick wins. It demanded patience and rewarded precision. It was a deck that separated average players from the elite. You couldn't rush, you couldn't panic. You had to think 5 moves ahead, manage your elixir perfectly, and always stay calm under pressure. It made Clash Royale feel like chess. You'd place your Tesla just right, watch it lock onto the perfect target, and slowly chip away at your opponent's tower while defending with surgical precision. It was frustrating to face, sure, but deep down, you respected the skill it took to use. And back in the early days, when people were still figuring out out how to defend efficiently, this deck showed everyone what true control looked like. Then came Lumberloon, and the whole energy of the game shifted. This deck didn't play slow, it didn't care about waiting. It was chaos. Raw, explosive, unstoppable chaos. One mistake and your tower was gone in seconds. You could be dominating the match for 2 minutes straight, but the moment that Lumberjack died and dropped his rage, everything changed. The balloon flew faster, hit harder, and suddenly you were watching your king tower explode before you even realized what happened. It was the deck that taught players fear. The fear of letting your guard down for even 1 second. You could be playing perfect defense all game and then one wrong cycle, one misplacement, and boom, game over. But as unfair as it sometimes felt, Lumberloon brought something new to Clash Royale: adrenaline. It gave players that high-risk, high-reward thrill that made the game unpredictable and exciting again. And then there's 2.6 Hog Cycle, the one deck that outlasted them all. It didn't rely on fancy win conditions or overpowered cards. It was simple. Just a Hog Rider, Musketeer, Cannon, and the cleanest cycling mechanics in the game. Yet that simplicity is what made it so powerful. Every meta changed. Every balance update came and went. Cards got reworked, new champions were added, but 2.6 stayed. It adapted, because this deck wasn't about cards, it was about fundamentals. About reading your opponent, knowing when to pressure and when to defend. It wasn't the easiest deck to master, but once you did, it felt like you could take on anyone. Players who stuck with 2.6 didn't just play Clash Royale, they understood it. They learned every interaction, every tile placement, every elixir trade. And even now, after all these years, you'll still see it being used by top players in global tournaments. That's how iconic it is. When you really think about it, these decks weren't just strong. They defined how people learned and experienced Clash Royale. They pushed players to think differently. They shaped strategies, inspired countless YouTube guides, and even sparked balance changes that altered the game forever. Sure, they made people rage. Everyone's had that moment, watching their tower melt to a Lumberloon push or getting slowly chipped down by an X-Bow lock they couldn't break. But those frustrations, they were part of the learning curve. They made you want to get better. They made you care about improving. And that's something rare in mobile games. Most games come and go, but Clash Royale had this cycle of mastery, where the decks that beat you eventually became the decks you learned to play. And that's how the community evolved. From casual players who just placed cards down randomly, to analytical minds who understood rotations, pressure, and tempo. It's easy to look back and call those decks toxic or broken. But in reality, they built the foundation of everything that came after. They're the reason why new metas even exist. The reason why players debate balance changes, why pros study matchups, and why we still talk about them today. Even now, when the game feels completely different, you can still trace parts of the current meta back to those eras. The Tesla's placement logic, the concept of cycling quickly for control, the understanding of elixir management, all of it came from those decks. And maybe that's why they'll always be remembered. Because they weren't just cards and strategies, they were moments. Moments when Clash Royale felt pure, competitive, and alive. Everyone has their own memory tied to one of these decks. Maybe it was the time you lost to X-Bow for the 10th time in a row. Maybe it was when your balloon snuck through a Tesla and crushed the tower at 1 second left. Or maybe it was when your hog connected for that final hit to win a 1 HP game. Those moments stick with you, and that's the beauty of it. Clash Royale has evolved a lot since those days. New cards, new modes, new champions. But no matter how much it changes, the legacy of these decks will always stay. Because they weren't just strong, they were defining. They taught us patience, control, discipline, and adaptability. And that's what makes this game so special. Even years later, people still talk about these decks like legends. Not because of stats or win rates, but because they made Clash Royale feel like Clash Royale. So, next time you queue up and face one of these archetypes, don't just roll your eyes or spam emotes. Appreciate it. You're facing a piece of history. You're playing against the DNA of what built this game. Because at the end of the day, balance changes fade, metas shift, and new cards come and go. But the legacy of decks like these, that never disappears. And that's it, guys. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.